Oh, hi. I'm Owlbear Rogue. Welcome to the cave. When I made my Midnight Relic video last week, our first Halloween one-shot, I felt like that fall feeling was just on the horizon. But this week, it has arrived. I have no more reservations, no doubts. I bought cinnamon brooms to make the house smell like a fall house should smell, and even a little mini one to make my car smell like a fall car should smell. I busted out the decorations for the front porch, very official. I made myself a chai, and I took a bath with some fancy pumpkin spice shea butter soap. I'm in my happy season. I'm moisturized. I smell amazing, and I am ready to deliver another piping hot Halloweeny one-shot for your enjoyment. This week's one-shot is called The Endless Maze of the Scarecrow King. This one is pure, classic Halloween. A corn maze fever dream, like Sleepy Hollow and Labyrinth had a spooky, spooky baby. The other cool thing about it is, if you want, it can be part of a two-part adventure. If you want to run it on its own, you sure can. But if you want to link it up with the adventure I'm going to share with you next week, it works beautifully that way too. Next week's adventure is about being a security escort for a woman who is not at all what she seems. This week's adventure takes place on the way to that woman's estate, again, if you like. Each adventure, each half, should run 2 to 3 hours. So this one I'm going to give you tonight, about 2 to 3 hours. If you want to combine them, now you're looking at more like a 4 to 6 hour game, something a little more standard for my folks when they sit down to play. As with most of my one-shots, it should work for players around level 3 to 5, depending on how you scale your baddies. You could make pre-gen characters, or explain a bit about the setting, and let your players bring their own. It really makes no difference with this one. Let's jump right in to the endless maze of the Scarecrow King. Here's the pitch for your players. Your party is traveling through the countryside on the way to the estate of a noblewoman, a famous actress named Lady DeBruff. She's hired you as a security escort for her performance at the Hollywood Harvest Festival in 2 weeks, and the timing couldn't be better. Frankly, you're broke. The journey has been pleasant, even though finances have forced you to make it on foot. The afternoons are golden and just warm enough that you find yourself taking your cloak on and off again a dozen times. The evenings are crisp, and by nightfall, you're grateful to have a warm fire to sleep beside. It's been a good harvest this year. People you meet on the road are happy and generous. You're just one more day's travel away from Lady DeBruff's estate and the promise of a bath, a hot meal, and a solid paycheck. There's a celebratory mood as you find a clearing in a cornfield and make camp for the night at the husked feet of a rustic scarecrow. You decide to include him in your festivities. You call him Your Majesty and offer him drinks throughout the evening. Several of you wind up taking some of his clothes off and putting them on and dressing up for laughs. You make sure to put everything back. You don't want to rob whatever farmer owns this field. Before you drift off to sleep, you dress him back up. Everything that is except for a crown of vines that had been sitting on his head. That, accidentally fell in the fire, while a couple of you were dramatically pretending to have a sword fight for the honor of your new patroness, Lady DeBruff. Tipsy and tired, you fall asleep, and straight into an unsettling dream. The Scarecrow King is there, but he's much larger than you remember and less jovial. He sits on an enormous throne of cornstalks. His head, a pendulous, rotting gourd, looms over you, blotting out the moon. "Where is my crown?" he demands in a voice that seems to come from everywhere at once. Flames spring from the gashes that are his eyes and mouth as he seems to grow even larger. "Where is my crown?" You can't even find your voice to respond. His entire head is aflame now. You will make me a crown of gold with 3 jewels, and place it upon my head before the moon goes dark. You will do this, or I shall make a crown from your very bones. He withdraws from your field of vision, and a perfect harvest moon hangs above you now in a starless sky. There, at the edge, it's starting to go dark. An eclipse. You thought you were alone, but you turn and your party is with you, their eyes wide in fear and confusion, as yours must be. Suddenly, the dried corn stalks around you begin to grow and grow and grow so fast you can hear them creaking from the strain of it. Just as the Scarecrow had done, they loom over you now, trapping you in. You can see no end to them. There's only corn stalks, velvet black sky, and the moon. Place it on my head before the moon goes dark, he said. You realize you don't have much time, or this is a dream you may never wake up from. A sinister scarecrow, a mysterious corn maze, and a harvest eclipse. Ugh, what more could you want from a game on an October night? Now all you have to do is set your party free in the Scarecrow King's endless maze. They have goals that are somehow both very clear and tantalizingly mysterious. Make a crown of gold and jewels and place it on the Scarecrow's head. They have a timer, the eclipse. They have to accomplish their goals by the time the moon goes dark. Or else. There are 5 enemies in this adventure. The maze itself, the passage of time, the baddies they have to get the gold from, the baddies they have to get the jewels from, and of course the Scarecrow King himself. I'll talk you through these encounters, and when I'm done, basically, you'll have an adventure ready to run. Our first, and my personal favorite enemy, is the corn maze, and it's closely related to enemy number 2, time. We can't talk about one without talking about the other. There are so many examples of moving, malevolent mazes in mythology and media. I mentioned Labyrinth before. Even the last Dungeons & Dragons movie had one. There are many things you can look to for inspiration for your maze if my ideas aren't to your tastes. But here's how I run mine. I'd first start with 2 pieces of construction paper, one black and one yellow or orange. Cut a big circle out of each one. Now you have the makings of an eclipse. If you wanted to be really fancy, you could use a big flashlight and point it towards the ceiling to be your moon and move your black piece of paper across that. There might even be some cool moon projectors you could find online or amongst the offerings at Spirit Halloween right now that might work if you want extra credit. Your players are going to make a series of checks as they attempt to navigate the maze. Each time they fail, they keep moving forward, but they lose time. The black circle moves further across the yellow circle. Move it on across, and that signifies, again, that loss of time. It's up to you whether you want each check in the maze to be a group skill check. You could have people take turns making the check, or just let a party member who's good at survival lead the way. Decide on your DC. I would set mine somewhere between 13 and 15. If they succeed, they move so fast the eclipse doesn't progress yet. Or you could have it move just a little bit, but not much. Whatever makes sense for you as a DM. Just make sure you're being consistent. If they fail their check to navigate the maze, the eclipse progresses. And if I didn't make that clear, that would be a survival check. Yeah, they fail, the eclipse progresses. Of course, make sure you allow your players to do clever things here if they come up with them. If they have a divination spell or a locate object or an animal companion that can help them, or they can wild shape themselves into something to get a bird's eye view of the maze, reward their ingenuity and make it easier for them to succeed. I personally would have there be probably 6 phases for the eclipse. They're going to start off first thing with a skill check to make it through the maze, and that's a place for it to potentially move forward. Then they'll encounter a baddie. No matter what they do, that's going to move the eclipse forward. That's going to take time. Then another skill check for the maze, possible move forward. Another baddie, definite move forward. And one more skill check to reach the throne of the Scarecrow King. That means they could fail one skill check and still get to the king in time to avoid his wrath. Seems hard, but fairly reasonable. I like to make my one-shots very hard, though, so I've added in one other way the party could lose time. This maze isn't going to just stand around waiting for your players to stroll through it. It holds dangers beyond the main encounters. And this is where I pull out my very favoritist DM tool. Do you know me well enough yet to guess what it is? The random timer. If you've listened to my channel with any regularity, you've almost certainly heard me wax poetic about random timers, especially in one-shots. I love how anxious they make my players. I love the screams of, "No! Ah! What?" when they go off. I love that even I don't know when that's going to happen. It makes me feel like a part of the adventure in a big way. So, set a random timer. There are several free ones on the internets to go off every 10 to 20 minutes, somewhere in there. Decide how mean you're feeling, basically. Maybe also pay attention to how the adventure is going for your group. If they're getting clobbered, you could just maybe pretend to reset it or give it a little more time. If this has been a cakewalk so far and they're moving too quickly, 10 minutes it is. Whatever else is going on, even if it's another big combat, when the timer goes off, a maze event is going to happen. Roll a d4 to see what event. Now, I will say if you don't want to use the random timer, you just hate fun, I don't know. I'm kidding. Everyone has different tastes. This could be a random encounter between each one. Instead of having a d4, I would make it a d6 and make two of the options be nothing happens and you just progress happily along. So you don't have to use a random timer here. I just think it's fun. I just think they're neat. So you roll your d4. Number 1, a flock of spectral crows descends on the cornfield. Make a big deal out of describing their eerie caws, their ominous approach, the flapping of their wings. Have the party roll dex to hide or dodge. Again, you decide your DC here. If they fail, they're going to take some piercing damage from these crows. This could be anything from a d4 to a d10, depending on your attitude and the level of your party. And it could even be a d12. And if you want to be a real meanie, you could also give them the blinded condition if they fail. I don't think you need a stat block for this, but if you want to make it a small combat instead of just an effect that quickly comes and goes, there is a swarm of ravens stat block easily available. Number 2, a thick, eerie mist moves through the corn stalks and envelops the players. Have them roll wisdom saving throws. Pick your DC. On a fail, they take psychic damage. And again, if your heart is black and made of stone, they might also be inflicted with the frightened condition and run off into the endless field. Terrified. Make that spooky. Think about the Scarecrow scenes from Dark Knight. And maybe the faces of their companions look like they're melting off, or they see faces or movement in the corn stalks. Make it spooky. If half of the party or more fails and runs off, the eclipse moves forward an extra notch. They lose time. This is what I was talking about just a moment ago. This is another way they could lose that precious, precious time. Number 3, a group of ghostly figures cloaked in black and carrying scythes moves through the field, chop, chop, chopping away. This is another dex save to avoid them. And also another great opportunity to creep your players out by describing the sound of the blades snicker-snacking, approaching. Set your DC. If they fail, they take necrotic damage. And again, if you're looking for that extra punch, maybe add the poisoned condition. Number 4, the maze tries to close around them and swallow them. They must make a strength check to fight their way through. If they fail, they take some slashing damage. If you've ever walked through a cornfield, you know this slashing damage is legit. Paper cuts have got nothing on corn husks. And, if you're nasty, the players discover part of their body is now made of husks, and their AC goes down by 1 or 2, again, depending on your mood. Oh, the maze is no joke, yeah? Again, if you want to run it without the random timer, add a 5 and a 6 and make those just nothing. Nothing happens. But having these effects randomly timed and randomly selected is going to add a lot of tension to this game for your players. That is my promise to you. Now for our main encounters. After their first skill check to get through the maze, they will find themselves in a field of pumpkins. Describe it to them. Also, describe it very pointedly, and I cannot emphasize this enough. Describe very, very pointedly how, in the glow of the harvest moon, the vines look like gold. If you need to, you can even remind them how the Scarecrow King's crown, the one you accidentally burned, was made of dry vines. They need to get a length of this vine to make the crown. And as you may have guessed, the field isn't going to give it up easily. As soon as they take some, the field is going to come alive. You need to decide based on, again, how your party's looking and what level they are, how many enemies to throw at them here. I would for sure put some vines in there that are going to create difficult terrain and maybe even restrain players on a failed save. I would have some of the pumpkins rise up off the ground, slowly turning ghoulish jack-o'-lantern faces towards the party, and give them twig blight bodies. What a phrase. Twig blight bodies. Say that 5 times fast. I would also have those pumpkin heads explode and do a small amount of force or acid damage when each blight is killed. Remember, this is a one-shot. Every combat doesn't have to be a total doozy. You're just giving them a taste of combat here, softening them up for bigger things later on. Hopefully they survive that, and now they have a length of vine. If they get it and they defeat whatever's in the field, the vine magically forms itself into the shape of a golden crown in their hands. So it still looks like vines, but it's made of gold. Now they just need to find the jewels. They're going to make another jaunt through the maze with its dangers, have another opportunity to possibly lose time. Eventually, they make their way to another clearing. Sitting all the way across that clearing, completely blocking their way, is an enormous spider web with a big, and I mean big old Shelob-sized orb weaver spider sitting in the middle of it. Now, side note here, your gal Owlbear loves spiders. This is a big deal. I'm going to say it. I love them as much as I love D&D. They are one of my favorite things in the whole world. So I always really hesitate to make spiders scary in any of my games. But there's just something so iconic about the harvest time and the big, beautiful orb weavers or big pumpkin orb weavers. Oh my gosh, I love them so much. I couldn't resist throwing her in here, but we'll make note, you don't necessarily have to have a party fight the spider. And if, like me, you have qualms and you want to put a different creature here, you can. All right, so they've made it. They spot this big maze. There's a couple things you need to make clear. And I emphasize this again, make it clear. It's a one-shot. You don't have time for them to be confused. The first thing to make clear, the spider doesn't seem to have eyes. It's blind. Ostensibly, it's probably counting on vibrations from its web, yeah? Second is glistening on the web are large drops of dew that sparkle like jewels. That's right, they need to get their hands on 3 of those dewdrops. Once they touch one, it will turn into a sparkling jewel in their hand. They can handle this encounter several ways. It could be a sneaky, roguish, dex-based challenge to steal the jewels and not A, get stuck in the web, or B, set off vibrations that alert the spider and kick off a combat. They could just straight up attack and make it a combat right away. I would just juice up a giant spider stat block for this. Or if you have a particularly clever party, they could somehow trick or even bargain with the spider. This spider can talk, and as a DM, you can decide what kinds of things a giant spider might want from a party of adventurers. Maybe it wants them to carry some of her eggs off with them to new lands. Maybe she wants just a little snack, just an arm or a leg. Nothing you won't miss. The choice is yours. You're a great DM. I know you're going to have some nefarious ideas. Once they've gotten the jewels by whatever means necessary, the jewels magically form themselves onto the crown. They need to make one last skill check in the maze, unless they've already boogered them all up and triggered this fight earlier. Dramatically describe the moon going dark and the king appearing wreathed in flame. And I probably should have made that clear earlier. When they run out of time, that's what you're going to do. No matter what's going on, no matter what they're doing, if they run out of time, it triggers this final battle. So perhaps they make it to the middle of the maze, they've got the crown, and they can put it on his head. If they make it to the Scarecrow King in time, they found their way through the Cornhusk maze to the Cornhusk throne and placed it on his terrifying head, they win. But again, I would make this a nail biter with the number of phases of the eclipse you choose. I would make it certainly not impossible to avoid a big fight at the end, but very, very unlikely that they wind up without a combat here. If they run out of time, give old Mr. Scarecrow King here a shambling mound stat block for a base and spice it up, depending on how your party's spec'd again, how they're looking at this point in the game. He could be legendary. I would give him at least one casting of Wall of Fire if it was me, and I would make the maze events, the ones we talked about, 1, 2, 3, 4, especially any you didn't wind up getting to use, the fog, the size, the crows, I would make them his lair actions. This is a one-shot. If your players are down for a game where they very well might die, go big or go home here. If the party either miraculously gets the king his crown in time, or if they defeat him, they wake up the next morning, sore but safe. If they defeated the king, there is his golden, bejeweled crown sitting in the ashes of last night's fire. That's the adventure. Unless you want to add on part 2, as I mentioned in the beginning. In part 2, the parties are going to tangle with this famous actress that has hired them at the estate they were traveling to when our story began. But that, my friends, is a tale for next week's episode. I talked a little bit about it last week in the Midnight Relic video. Horror stories never have perfect happy endings, so think about something a little bit creepy you could tack on the end here if you're not moving on to the next part of the adventure. Or think about spooky ways you could describe it if someone does die in the maze. Maybe the next morning they've defeated the king, but they've lost a friend and they wake up and there's another scarecrow in the field, or suddenly the scarecrow that they were sleeping under is wearing their friend's clothes and their friend is nowhere to be found. Ooh, something like that. What do you think? I'm very, very excited about this one shot. Its only downside, I would say, is there's not a ton of roleplay opportunities baked into it. But if you want a quick and dirty, fast-paced little horror adventure, it's going to get the job done. It's fairly family-friendly, too. Nothing too gory or scary. I'm actually going to be running it at a local convention on Halloween weekend next month. I'll be sure to tell you all about how it goes, especially given that I'm going to open it up to a bunch of strangers. That always is interesting. This is notably going to be the first one-shot I run using character creation and rules from the brand spanking new 2024 Player's Handbook. I am dying to know in the comments. Tell me, what do you all think of it so far? I gotta say, I am digging it. It just seems so intuitive and easy to use. The rules index is chef's kiss. Anyway, I'm amped to give it a whirl. Again, let me know what you think. And let me know what you think about this adventure. How can I fine-tune it before I unleash it at the convention? Join me again next Thursday for part 2. And if you missed it, check out last week's standalone spooky one-shot, The Midnight Relic, a gothic horror heist and adventure that over 40 players have run through. If you're going to run a Halloween game, I want to make sure you got it covered. Thank you, as always, for exploring the feminine urge to play Dungeons & Dragons with me, Owlbear Rogue.